Hello, BookTube. This channel, the least technical channel anywhere on BookTube, has been absolutely besieged with tech problems in the last week or more. Absolutely besieged, mainly because of my desire to simplify my tech here at Hyde Cottage. What I would really like is to simplify the number of machines that I have, that I use every day. I'd like that to be down to 2 or even 1 would be great. Even 1 machine would be great. In other words, since my tech needs are very small, a machine that I can write on and that I can also film videos on. That's what I would like, where I could do both of those things on the same machine. And I thought I had succeeded in that with a MacBook Air, 2019 MacBook Air, and was proceeding to do that today when the video stopped. The audio continued, but the video froze while I kept talking in the background. And I have no idea what caused that. I'll do a small amount of research, but of course, once that happens once, you're always going to be worried that it's going to happen again, and that it's going to happen in the middle of a video that you can't redo. That was my dream. My hope was that that machine would be the one where I could just live on that machine and not do anything else. The kind of tech horror story, the thing I'm trying to avoid that has been my lot for far too long, it was my lot even before the internet, is to have a machine that only does one thing. And to have maybe another machine that only does a different one thing, and that there's no shared responsibility between any of these things. So they all have different power cords, they all have different needs to charge, and they're effectively useless for anything but that one thing. That's the nightmare I'm trying to avoid. And so far, I'm not avoiding it at all. And the same thing is true for filming location, where everything was just meat and potatoes, business as usual forever on this channel, and all of a sudden it's become some sort of active issue with a really kind of Manichaean split, where if I am in the location where you can easily see my little dog Frida in the background, then I'm in a location that is prone to absolutely thunderous avalanches of background noise. And I thought maybe I'm just catching the neighborhood at a bad time, so I tried at 10 in the morning, then at 9 in the morning, then at 8 in the morning, and I refused, just because I don't want to deal with the personal anger involved. I refuse to try to film videos at 7 in the morning in order to avoid thunderous background noise. Tanks, surface-to-air missiles, rebel mortar fire, sirens, police sirens, ambulances, fire engines, people screaming in 5 different languages, cars backing up, cars crashing into each other, cars crashing into people screaming in 5 different languages. If I have to film at 7 in the morning to avoid that kind of crap, then I don't want to do it. Especially, I don't want to try it in case it fails. So there's that location. And the benefit there is that you see Frida. And the deficit is that there's an unbelievable amount of background noise. So bad that for 4 or 5 points in every video, I have to stop talking until it goes away, or I have to scream, veins sticking out, screaming in order to be heard over it, which is not anything I want to do. And I know myself well enough to know that if these videos start to include things that I don't like, I won't do them anymore. And I don't want that. I rather appreciate my imaginary BookTube friends. That is one option. And then the other option is this one, where there's far less background noise and no changeable lighting, but where Frida is not in the background. Lord Ganesha is in the background here. So Frida is still here. I don't know if you can hear her. She's digging a hole down to the center of the earth. I don't know why. But it's the kind of a thing she does. She goes crazy and digs a hole to the center of the earth. I don't know one way or another why she does it. One, she's still with me, but she's not visible on camera. So this is by way of a spleen-inflected update on the tech side of the least technical channel on BookTube. I am still trying to work things out. My short-term goal later today will be to go on to MacBook help forums and ask, why did my Mac stop filming? It's still recording audio, but why did it freeze? If there's some sort of easy fix that's in the settings, then I'll try it again and see. That would be ideal. because that would be one machine, one thing that did everything. But in the meantime, I've got all this tech here, and this setup works just fine. And the wrangling with these things, as you know, if you are of a certain disposition towards technology, irritates. The wrangling irritates. It gets the old blood pressure up. And a ready solution to that is to take the bean on a walk, to take Frida outside. It's getting a little warmer outside here, and I think the next couple of days are going to be close to 90. I, of course, have no grounds to complain, considering that the western half of the United States, 90 is the low temperature at night at 3 in the morning. And the high temperature during the day is 120. So I'm in no position to complain. But nevertheless, Frida is extremely vulnerable to the heat. Has been since she was a little puppy. I kind of thought it would fade. All puppies are prone to overheating, but it hasn't faded with her. So walking is a little bit on the iffy side. We do it whenever she wants to. My answer is always yes, but not for very long, not for long enough to exhaust her. But there's another surefire fix for tech irritation, and that is a book haul. Unfortunately, I have one for you today. I went to the Brattle bookshop in downtown Boston. First thing this morning, I was there when they were putting out the sale carts, which with a normal used bookstore would take about 10 minutes, but the Brattle sale carts fill an entire lot. There are thousands and thousands of books out there for $1, $3, and $5, and organized in no way other than price. So you could scour that lot for the whole course of a leisurely hour, which I have done, and go back literally the next day and see things that you missed the first time. So I went back. I went back to the Brattle. I've got a bunch of books to show you, and including some amazing finds. And we'll start with the first one. The first one is a little bit on the ruthless side. There's a tiny amount of selfishness involved in this Brattle book haul. Ordinarily, I am just a revolving door here for books of all kinds. I get new books, I get advanced copies, I get old books. I go to used bookstores, and a lot of people don't have access to the used bookstore situation that I do. Even the limited access that I use now, I mainly go to the Brattle bookshop in downtown Boston. There are all sorts of other thrift venues that I could go to that I don't often go to anymore. Even so, there are some people I know perfectly well because I've lived in these places. There are some people who live in places where even that is a dream. There's nothing at all. There's maybe one despised little shelf in the back of a charity shop that never changes, or that only gets worse. So ordinarily, my watchword here for books of any kind is not selfishness. It's just the opposite. If you see something that you want, why I have far more access to, to good used books than a lot of people do. I'd be happy to send it out, especially since the Brattle will provide. If I'm looking for something, the Brattle will get it to me eventually. Again, it's a bounty. They're out buying all the time. Nevertheless, there were some self-centered themes running through today's Brattle haul, starting with the first book, which is the Dasari Experiment by Frank Herbert, in this gorgeous old paperback that still has the shine of the letters on it, even though this came out 50 years ago, right? This came out in 1977. And I read it then. This is Herbert's sort of sequel to The Whipping Star. And this particular story is about, it's a long and complicated story. It's hard science fiction, like Dune, but bearing almost no similarities, which really is a great experiment in pinpointing what you really love about an author's prose and what you don't. If you only know Frank Herbert through Dune, then you're not going to be able to see some of the things that he can do, because some of the things he can do aren't called for in that whole series. And I am planning a buddy read, sort of read along of this book. We haven't made official announcement videos yet, so I don't want to overstep my bounds. But that person does not have a copy of this book, and I thought, oh well, okay, I'll go to the Brattle bookshop and I will certainly find you a copy of the Dasari Experiment. I don't know if I'll find it today, but I'll find it eventually. And I saw this at the Brattle, and my first thought was, oh, look at that. It didn't take long at all. You found a copy. And then my second thought was, no, I want this. I want this for myself. This is the paperback that I originally read this thing in, with this great surreal cover artwork. And mine, by the time I was done with it 50 years ago, didn't have that shine on the letters anymore. So I'm keeping this. Isn't that self-centered of me? I'm keeping this. I will find another copy for my future buddy reader. But I'm keeping this one as vintage old science fiction paperback. Then this next one, I don't know if it's self-centered. There's a chance that it's exactly the opposite. I showed you the other day. I don't think I have it within reach here. Is this it right here? Oh no. Oh no. This is the Norton Critical New Testament. The New Testament and Apocrypha. I must have grabbed the wrong book by mistake. This is the Norton Critical New Testament and Apocrypha. This is the new edition that they have that has blurbs on the back from Jack Miles and Robert Alter and me. And me. I am blurbed on the Bible. I don't know how this got here. Here, let me just put it aside. No, the other day I found a book called Galaxy. It's a great paperback that takes you behind the scenes of Galaxy magazine and also provides you with short stories from the history of Galaxy magazine. So you don't just get an anthology of short stories, you also get a sort of the stories of what the editors were like or what the life of the magazine was like. Invaluable, fascinating stuff. And I found that copy at the Brattle a month ago and immediately thought of Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads. And although he needs precious little help from me, he does as many book hauls as I do up there in Vermont. I immediately thought of him because you don't see this. I don't see this paperback ever. And we both have a lifelong fascination with science fiction. So I got it and I gave it to him when Frida and I went up to Vermont. And although I always say the Brattle will provide, I never say the Brattle will keep providing. If I see a thing that I never see ever, if I see it once, I'm okay. I figure that was the time that I was going to see it at the Brattle. And I love to give bullseye things like that to the right recipients. So it wasn't a pang at all to give it up. And then just the other day, I found a second copy of that same Galaxy trade paperback. And I thought, well, okay, that's great. You know, your karma was repaid. You got a copy for yourself now. And today, I found a mass market paperback that I also gave to Mark Richardson, that I also thought at the time, you'll never see this again. The Eureka Years. This is about the early founding years of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction that I showed you yesterday, back in 1949. And this is the same thing as that Galaxy book. So there are many stories from those first formative years of fantasy and science fiction that are reprinted here. But in between them, there are nonfiction bits of all kinds. Collected correspondence between some of the famous writers and these editors. Also, my favorite section of this book is called Sorry, But. And it's a very short chapter that reprints some of the rejection letters that the editors sent out to writers, showing all the whole spectrum of what those rejection letters could be like. These editors were very hands-on. And they got subscriptions from all areas of the professionalism spectrum. So some people would send them handwritten manuscripts, just folded into an envelope and ask for your consideration. Unbelievably unprofessional. And the editors would sometimes write back to them and say, you know, this is unbelievably unprofessional. You absolutely should not send a handwritten manuscript to anyone. It's an insult. If you can't afford a typewriter, buy, beg, or borrow one, or pay someone to type your work, but don't do this again. And also for going concerns like this in the science fiction periodical world, the old protocol was a self-addressed stamped envelope, where you weigh your package and pay and include an envelope with accurate postage, so that you're not costing them anything to send your story back, or to send you your story plus correspondence back. That was the standard rule for 100 years. Self-addressed stamped envelope, include that as well. And the little chapter on rejection notes really shows you how wonderful these people could be, how broad-minded, also how nasty. I mean, when they sent some authors rejection letters, they went into very hard specifics as to what was wrong with the story. Just fantastic stuff. And I got this for Mark. I was happy to do it, but I never in a million years thought I'd see another copy, much less within a month. So I now have both those books that I sent him. And then this next one is mass market hardcover, and I had a feeling that I already had a copy of it, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I grabbed it, and this is The Shores of Light by Edmund Wilson, and these very distinctive old mass market hardcovers. See, these are almost the same size. Wilson, all of Wilson's books were printed in this way. His decade anthologies, so the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and these collections of his occasional work, his critical essays, literary essays, personal essays, autobiographical essays, that sort of thing. The Shores of Light, I think, is probably my favorite of all of these volumes. It turns out I do have a copy, so this is a double. I'll just have to make a determination as to which of the two of them is in better shape. But this has everything that you could ever want. This is just piece after piece. And this is, I know it's sort of, it's probably, well, nobody cares about Edmund Wilson anymore. But when people did, it was a little bit delicate to say that his literary talents waned as the decades went on. I think it was true, but it was a little bit delicate to say, and this is him at his absolute peak, writing about everybody from Dos Passos to Fitzgerald to Byron and everything else, and the huge spectrum. The thing that you wanted from Edmund Wilson was Edmund Wilson, not any kind of pigeonholed expertise. So, and this book really captures that. So I grabbed it since it was right there, and all these books were dirt cheap. So it was the only problem was carrying them, because I don't have conscripted labor anymore. I might, in the upcoming school year, I might have conscripted labor again, muscular teenagers again. But right now, I am al fresco, carrying this stuff on my own. This next one is a ratty trade paperback. It won't last. It might last a reading, but it won't last more than that. I'm going to have to find a better edition of this. And boy, oh boy, talk about an exercise in separating the writer from the work. If you had to do that, Wilson was pretty odious. But this guy, he's been odious for 50 years. He's been cheesing off the rest of the world through his writing for 50 years. That's pretty dedicated. This is Joseph Epstein. And this is Plausible Prejudices, which is just the same thing as Shores of Light. It's a collection of his deadline work. It's a collection of his literary essays, literary reviews, prefaces, that sort of thing, reconsiderations. And he's really good at it. I'm going to stick my neck out and say he's really good at it. So this, The Literary Life Today, Reviewing and Being Reviewed, Why is John Irving So Popular, pieces on Anne Beattie, on Norman Mailer, on John Updike, on Bernard Malamud. The 20th century beat that the literary freelancers are still doing today. He's really good at it, but this is not going to last. I will reinforce it, but he did this, and I think, if I remember correctly, there's one other literary collection of his. This was his first book. But a couple of years after this, he did another one, or a few years, 10 years after this, he did another one, and I would like them both, because he's very good at it. He's not very good at anything else, but nevertheless, this is just, it's another joke. It continues to make a joke of that literary books about books, book reviewing, book essays, bookcase of mine, which is, it was a great idea for all of 5 minutes, and now is even more overcrowded than when it was right here over my shoulder. So I need to come up with a solution to that, because those things, that bookcase is one that I very much use, and I can't use it now. Everything's double stacked or crammed in the sides, and you need to move 4 books in order to get at the one you want, that sort of thing. And I don't want that to be true. That's why I moved those books out there in the first place. So I need to make an afternoon's project out of that when I'm not wrestling with tech. I even brought out a 2008 MacBook. The plastic polycarbonate white casing of a 2008 MacBook, the kind that says MacBook. It was before there was a MacBook Pro and a MacBook Air. I even brought that thing out to see if, will this thing, from 2008, is it possible that this is my one machine? Even though it's not updated by Apple anymore, not supported by them, those old MacBooks are workhorses. But one way or another, a lot of you won't know Joseph Epstein's name, but a long time ago, 50 years ago, he wrote an essay that he has not ever really retracted, that you certainly don't want to read during Pride Month, or maybe it's exactly the sort of thing you want to read during Pride Month. About 50 years ago, he wrote an essay fervently wishing that all gay people could be wiped off the face of the earth, and saying that if one of his sons came to him and said, I've murdered someone, or I've invented a Ponzi scheme and defrauded thousands of people of their life savings, or I beat my wife, he would be disappointed, sure, but that the only thing that would really desolate him would be if one of his sons came to him and said, "I'm gay." And it got all sorts of pushback. It was an odious, horrible, disgusting piece of writing. And I don't even believe that it was the then equivalent of clickbait. I think that Joe Epstein really meant it, and I think he still does. And you might think, okay, well, you get a thing like that, but you're going to stop. You're going to watch your words more carefully. You're not going to keep cheesing people off, even 50 years later. And that's not true. If you spend any time on social media, and it even reached the national news, you may remember our kerfuffle a little while ago, where certain parts of the internet were taking issue with the fact that Jill Biden was using doctor as a title when her degree is not a medical doctor. She's not a medical doctor. And it got to the point where she even gave a national interview and said, I worked really hard for that doctorate, so of course I'm going to use it. And there were many, many discussions about whether or not the whole debate was sexist, which I think goes without saying that it was. And you're probably wondering, what if Joseph Epstein is still alive, what could he possibly have had to do with that? He must be an old fossil, so he can't be on social media. No, he's the one who started that. He's the one who started that. He wrote the bone dead ignorant op-ed for, I think, the Wall Street Journal, essentially asking, who is this uppity woman brandishing her higher degree in all our faces? One way or another, it's a perfect example of separating the author from the writing. His occasional book writing, when he's under deadline, when an editor is watching what he's doing and giving him a word count, is very, very good. I will get a replacement for this as soon as I find a hardcover, and I will find his other volume. I wonder if it actually says in here what that other volume is called. Okay, the ones that are listed in here seem to be, if I remember correctly, they are his memoirs. So I don't think that it's listed in here. But one way or another, I'll be on the lookout, especially since the Brattle has a certain kind of synchronicity. It's entirely possible that the person who dumped this dumped that as well. So we shall see. The next one, an absolute treat. We move from a case of separating the author from the writing to wishing that you could make them even closer. Although in this case, there's still no one-to-one comparison. This is The $1 Million Mermaid, which is an autobiography of Esther Williams, the great swimming actress. And at the bottom there, it says, "with Digby Deal." That "with" is doing a whole lot of work here, as she was the first person to admit. She free associated for this guy, and he did the writing. so this is not the book that Esther Williams would have written had she been left on her own in a room with a typewriter and a fifth of scotch. But it is a fantastic book, just fantastic. When it first came out, I was working in bookstores. This came out in 1999. It came out in 1999. I was working in bookstores. I was not reviewing, and I wonder if this, this is loaded with pictures. Fantastic. Here we go. There's her, one of her favorite co-stars, Fernando Lamas. Unfortunately, there are no pictures in the inset here of her with her stepson, Lorenzo Lamas. Lorenzo Lamas, when he was a teenager in L.A. Anyway, let's not get distracted. I read this I read it when it came out. I worked in a bookstore at the time, and as with a lot of retail bookstores, you could borrow books. You leave the dust jacket behind and you borrow the book, and therefore you can read it. It's kind of an informal program that retail bookstores do in order to help their workers to become familiar with the thing they're selling. And I don't know if retail bookstores do it anymore, but it used to be that your employees were told, if you want to borrow a book, we're not expecting you to unload the equivalent of 6 hours' wages in order to buy a new hardcover. Instead, you can borrow it so that you know something about it. And I did that all the time. If I had a congenial manager, the manager had to sign it out and upkeep the book where all these things happen. If I had a congenial manager, quite a few managers in retail are not congenial, but if I had one, I would do one every day, just to learn more and more about the books that were. And I borrowed this in 1999 when I had a wonderful manager. I actually asked, I said, am I actually bothering you to do this? And she said, no, you're not. Provided you tell me what you thought of every single book you borrow. It's invaluable, absolutely invaluable. The rest of us don't read as much as you and Deb do. And this manager said to me back in that locked, back room, there are times when I think you and Deb are the only ones who remember what we're all here for. So no, I borrowed this, and I was expecting the worst, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Digby Deal earned whatever money exchanged hands for this book, because he really captures the saucy, can-do, graceful voice of this actress. Just a wonderful memoir, and a thing that I was hoping. I've always been hoping that I would find it in the last 20 years. When we got the book, we also got a promotional kit. Of course, the bookstore doesn't have any use for a promotional kit, and the promotional kit included bookmarks that were just Esther Williams. The bookmark was just her standing there, her beautiful smile, her gams that go on for miles. And I have a bunch of those, but I just told myself sooner or later you will find the book itself out in the wild, and I did today. I'm going to give it a reread for the first time in 20 years. That's going to be a lot of fun. Then this next one is also going to be a reread. It's a considerably longer span. I believe this is, what's the pub date on this one? 1984, so another 10 years. I haven't read it since it came out. And once again, I borrowed it. So I've never actually owned a copy of this thing, even though I've been tempted by the mass market paperback. And this is Lincoln by Gore Vidal. A gigantic historical novel about President Lincoln. This thing is lodged in an unending series of historical novels that Gore Vidal wrote, some of which are very good, some of which are not very good, and the trending arc, the narrative theme of which, as they went along, grew closer and closer to the idea that America's long and storied history was mainly about laboring over the centuries to produce Gore Vidal. So the later volumes, the very last volumes in this whole American Tapestry series, are a little bit on the embarrassing side. This had a bit of a polarizing effect on critical reviews of the time. Harold Bloom loved it, for instance. Thought it was fantastic. Wrote it up, I think, in the New York Review of Books, and did it in glowing terms. And he and Gore Vidal they did not often see eye to eye. As time went on and their girths widened and their hair thinned, they both started to think of themselves as lonely lions on the ramparts of civilization. But Lincoln scholars didn't tend to like this book, and they were an audience that Gore Vidal kind of wanted to please. He spent a long time on this book, did a lot of research. He kind of wanted to please them, and a lot of them said the Lincoln in here is unrecognizable. It's not just that this is a different shade of interpretation. We don't get this at all. And Gore Vidal made some disparaging comments about this book himself. Said once he realized that the critical reception was not just hosannas of praise, he did what he tended to do, which was to sort of slightly disown the thing, to stand up for it, but also say, it wasn't that hard to do. I don't put that much stock by it. And the combination of those two things made me read this uncharitably when I read it back in 1984. And I want to give it another go. I'm currently doing a very slow read-through of Terrible Swift Sword by Bruce Catton. I am not expecting that kind of literary quality here, but it's got me in the mood for American Civil War stuff. And I'm also in the mood to see if my original reactions to this thing were unfair, in addition to being uncharitable. So it's a nice big historical novel. I'm always in the mood for those. I will get to it this summer. And then this next one is World War II history. It came up because of an email correspondence that I was having with a fellow booktuber who did just sort of a whimsical look at movies that came out in 1977, because we had been part of a Voxer conversation about books that came out in 1977. And one of the movies that came out in 1977 was A Bridge Too Far, a terrific World War II movie. Fantastic. It tends to get buried because some of the acting is very bad. Some of the acting in it is very, very good, but some of it is very bad. And also, the movie tends to get disregarded a little bit because of the stunt casting. And by the stunt casting, when it comes to A Bridge Too Far, I don't mean one particular person that you're not expecting to see. Although the one particular person that you're not expecting to see doesn't turn out to be the actor that you were expecting. All the buzz of the movie ahead of time was that one particular young actor was going to make a very brief cameo appearance in the movie for a scandalous amount of money. And instead, when the camera pans to that character and the character turns around, it's Robert Redford. What? But anyway, no, it wasn't that kind of stunt casting. It was that it was virtually every working actor and actress in Hollywood that was in the thing, sometimes for 5 minutes at a time. And that has tended to overshadow the real worth, I think, the real worth of the movie. Some of the acting performances are absolutely incredible. Not all of them. I think this was Elliot Gould's 200th movie, and he had 250 more to go. He's never actually turned in a good acting performance in any one of those 570 movies. And he's not good in this movie either. But nevertheless, some people are. And the visual set pieces, some of them are astonishing. And as far as war movies go, it has the best final scene of any war movie I know. And the movie is A Bridge Too Far. That's what came up from that 1977 discussion. I found a copy of the book. Now, I have the Library of America volume of Cornelius Ryan that has A Bridge Too Far and one other book. But sometimes you want the book just by itself, and sometimes you want it in the hardcover that you originally read it in. I originally read this. This came out in 1974, so we go back from 1984 to 1974. I wonder how far back we'll go. I read this when it first came out. I loved it, gobbled it up. I've owned it many, many times. I owned the mass market paperback forever and ever until it, I think, was torn apart by beagles. And I saw this for $1 and grabbed it because the mere discussion of the movie makes me not only want to see the movie again, which YouTube makes very easy, but also to read the book again. So the next book came as a distinct shock to me. The last Brattle book haul that we did, I showed you Christ by Jack Miles, subtitled A Crisis in the Life of God, in which Jack Miles reads the New Testament and the epistles and some of the Apocrypha, and reads them sort of chronologically and flat on their face as a kind of straightforward narrative story of an event in which the God of the Old Testament decides to incarnate himself as his own son in order to feel pain and fear and misery, in order to atone to his own chosen people and then to the broader ruck of humanity. And I got Christ because as soon as I saw it at the Brattle the other day, I realized that I didn't have a copy, that I'd given away my copy. Christ was a kind of a sequel to God, an autobiography by Jack Miles. A great book in which he does the same thing to the Old Testament and the character of God. He treats the Old Testament as one book written by one person in which the character of God develops over time. There's an apocalypse of noise going on here. I'm realizing that I'm starting to shout. That's because a party on wheels was stuck at a red light. They're now gone, so we can go back to talking normally. God was a revelation. That book was a revelation. Just an amazing way. Jack Miles knows perfectly well that's not how the Bible was accumulated, and that's not a historically valid way to read it, but it is a narratively valid way to read it in his hands anyway, because God was amazing. And when I got Christ from the Brattle, and I was done talking about it with you, and I was done inventorying it and whatnot, I brought it here into this room and thought, okay, well, I'll clear out room. I'll just put it on the shelf right next to God, an autobiography. And it wasn't here. I realized I then did a frantic search of the whole place and realized that somehow or other I don't have a copy of God, an autobiography by Jack Miles, and now I do. I found a copy at the Brattle. I will hold on to this one. It might need a little reinforcing. The cover is it'll need cleaning up, definitely. The cover is a little dirty and also a tiny bit ripped. But I go back to this thing, so it won't be any trouble to fix it up. And so now I have both of those. The third book on God in the Quran is one that I can sort of skip. I read it, I reviewed it, and I wasn't all that impressed with it. I might go back to it if I were to find it for $1 somewhere. I might give it another read, but not right away. I read it very carefully, so I don't think it has any new surprises in store for me until later on in a few years. And another reason why I wanted to get this is something that we've already seen. Because Jack Miles is my blurb buddy. He is blurbed on the back of this Norton Critical New Testament. Robert Alter, Jack Miles, and me. So I that's another reason why I wanted this, but this is a classic. I like it even more than Christ, the follow-up volume. So I was very happy to find it, especially for dirt cheap. Then this next one is huge. This more than any other book here really had me muttering oaths under my breath in 5 different languages about the absence of that unpaid labor. there's nothing quite so convenient when you're at a used bookstore as loading up books and then loading them into a backpack and putting them on the back of a topless muscular teenager, someone who could walk with them on their back for 10 hours without tiring. That's a great luxury that I have been denied because of COVID-19. And this book really made me feel that, because it's freaking enormous. And I had a copy of this. I had an advanced copy of this and the finished copy. I'm sure that if you dug back in my videos, you would find this. You would find me showing you this hardcover. And I got rid of it. And in this case, I know exactly who I gave it to. I just put it in a box and mailed it off because the person the recipient, was squealing with glee over getting it, and there was no way they were going to be able to find it in their podunk village, and there was no way they were going to be able to afford it if they did. So I sent it to them and just bided my time and found it today. Look at this thing. Classic American crime fiction of the 1920s. This is annotated by the great editor Leslie Klinger with a foreword by the great editor Otto Penzler. And look at the size of this thing. Just enormous. And this still has the gilding on the numbers there. And this is annotated, so you get text and then the annotations on the side. It's also generously illustrated. Oh, there's a floor diagram. And there are also movie stills because of any movie adaptations. Look at that. Orchestra seating. Original street plans. And what this is 5 novels from the 1920s. This is not a gigantic anthology of short stories. This is 5 novels that are meant to show all the different tenors and tones of the breakaway, the great debut, really the great breakaway debut decade of crime fiction in the United States. So you're probably going to want to know, right, what those things are. We have, let's see, let me read them to you. House Without a Key by Earl Biggers, The Benson Murder Case by S.S. Van Dyne, The Roman Hat Mystery by Ellery Queen, Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, and Little Caesar by W.R. Burnett, that was made into a famous Edgar G. Robinson movie, and that with the classic concluding line in the movie and in the book. Is this the end of Rico? Where the main character, a thug, a mobster, cannot believe that he's actually going to die. And as famous as that line is, I always prefer the line right before it in the book, where Rico he's just a monster. He's just a Neanderthal, just a knuckle-dragging leg breaker. And it managed to be fascinating anyway. Burnett manages to make it's a very poorly written book, but he manages to make it very propulsive. And in that very last scene, on the very last page, right before Rico is shot and says, "Is this the end of Rico?" There's actually what I think is a better, funnier line, because in that moment of extremity, for the first time, Rico prays. For the first time, he seeks the intervention of a higher power. He's never dealt that before. He's never had any kind of a philosophical edge to his life at all. And his prayer is, "Give me a break." That's the one and only prayer that he says in his life. And the first time that I read that in a cheap mass market paperback a long time ago, I told that to a friend of mine who was a longstanding member of the Chosen People, and he said, "Well, that's pretty much every prayer." Can't argue with that. That's Rico's prayer. Give me a break. This has a fantastic long introduction. The annotations are not dutiful and picky. Instead, they're really well done. They're really nuanced and faithful. They're unfailingly interesting, which not all annotations are. Overjoyed to find this thing, and it's in perfect condition. I noticed when I was holding this up to read you the contents that this was remaindered at the Strand. And then eventually made its way to the Brattle. Fine. It's now mine, and I'm not giving it up. I gave up that first volume, but I'm not giving up the second one. And then the last book that we'll do here, since I can't do short videos anymore on this channel, is a big illustrated thing that I had once upon a time. This was long before we were talking. 2001. Or maybe even earlier than that. Well, one way or another, this was a long time ago. I did not get this from the publisher. I just bought it. This is The Book of Life, with an introduction by Stephen Jay Gould. This is a relatively thin and oversized history of evolution that takes you from the very earliest beginnings to the modern day, and that does so. It is just beautifully illustrated, just all throughout. Not just the. Let me get. Yeah, look at that. There's the cover. There's the cover illustration. That kind of paleo artwork. I just love this sort of thing. I live for it, and it's all through this thing. What we got here? Okay, here we have, in the tropical forests of southern Africa about 250 million years ago, two male mostrops clash with their massive thick-framed skulls. These large herbivores were about 16 feet long, and violent head-bashing contests were probably fought to establish dominance within the herd in the same way as present-day mammals, such as wild rams, prepare for mating season. Sounds a lot like South Boston. It actually looks a lot like South Boston, too. They are ramming heads together. Just beautiful. Look at all the details there. You always, in paleo artwork like this, you always get other animals and accurate plant forms in the background. So it's a geek's delight. And this thing is absolutely full of that kind of artwork. That's one of the main reasons I got it, that and that it was dirt cheap. So there you go. That was a Brattle book haul. And it was just what the doctor ordered. I have been taking the bean out on little restorative walks as well, as I continue to wrestle with the tech on this channel. I'm going to continue to do that, but the weekend's not looking good for videos anyway, so maybe by Monday I'll have a choice. I'll have the solution in mind. In the meantime, we have The Book of Life by Stephen Jay Gould. We have crime fiction of the 1920s. Leslie Klinger and Otto Penzler teaming up. Can't do much better than that. We have God, an autobiography by Jack Miles. We have A Bridge Too Far by Cornelius Ryan. Some of these are classics. We have Lincoln by Gore Vidal, a book he would like to have made into a classic. He would like to have written a historical novel that was well received as Creation or Julian, or Burr, but this one wasn't. Then we have The $1 Million Mermaid, Esther Williams in a lively ghost-written memoir of her time in the golden age of studio Hollywood. Then we have Plausible Prejudices by Joseph Epstein. This is deadline work, and it's really good. He might be a jerk, but his deadline work is really good. Then we have The Shores of Light by Edmund Wilson. Somebody went to the bother of putting a plastic dust jacket cover on this thing. Very nice. Then The Eureka Years, a second volume found in a month of a thing that I really want. I really wanted it. It was better to give it than to keep it, and now I don't need to worry about it. And The Dasari Experiment by Frank Herbert. Which I am keeping. I am keeping The Dasari Experiment for myself, and I will find another copy. I'll find as many copies as the rest of you need, but I'm keeping this one for myself. It's a very self-centered Brattle mail haul. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up at long last, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.